Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Happy USA-Mexico Day. No, do not adjust your radios, your internets, whatever you're listening on. You're not listening on a radio. You are listening on the internet. Do not adjust your internet. That is the music for Soccer Morning today, as selected by our friend Mike Rodriguez, a.k.a. Maxi Rodriguez, a.k.a. Football Intellect on Twitter. Yes, he is that guy. He did choose some music. There's a theme, and it seems to both fit the USA-Mexico game day and not fit, particularly if you're a U.S. fan. Perhaps it does not fit. Maxi himself roots for L3. So there you go. Thanks a lot for the music, Maxi. It's lovely stuff. You'll be hearing more of that. Or like that. Let's just say it that way. On today's program, it is a big program. We've got tons of stuff to talk about. In fact, breaking news this morning out of Barcelona or out of Europe on Barcelona and transfer ban. We're going to have to talk about that. Lined up to talk today, Pablo Maurer, DCist MLS soccer writer, DC United beat writer for MLSsoccer.com. MLSist is his Twitter handle. He'll join us in a couple minutes to talk about the DC mayoral primary, the Democratic primary in the District of Columbia, because it has a significant impact, or could have a significant impact, on whether or not DC United gets their stadium built at Buzzard Point. And that could lead to some questions over the future of that team. So we'll talk to him. We've got John Arnold live from Phoenix, where USA is taking on Mexico this evening. We'll talk to him. He's from goal.com. And then our friend Leander Schalakins from Fox Soccer will join us to talk about the Champions League. A couple of interesting results yesterday. Manchester United secures a 1-1 home draw against Bayern Munich, a result that people might not have seen coming. Atletico Madrid goes to the Camp Nou and gets a 1-1 draw with Barcelona. We'll talk about those games, and we'll talk about the games today, Real Madrid and Dortmund and PSG and Chelsea. First of all, though, we have a little housekeeping, little business to get into as it relates to Soccer Morning, the future of Soccer Morning, and what we're going to ask you for a favor again. This is what we're going to do. The realities of this game, and when I say this game, I mean the podcast game. Don't hate. Yeah, this is the game. We're in the game. Yeah, I'm making it too much of it. But the realities of the podcast game mean that it's tough to keep a show like this on the air day to day without a little help. And yes, we've asked you before. You guys have come through with flying colors. The Indiegogo campaign was a success. But in order to keep the show going, and it being a World Cup year and a pivotal year for MLS, and certainly with everything else that's going on around the world, and we love being here to respond in the moment to the things that are happening. The Barcelona transfer ban is a perfect example. In order to keep the show going, we're going to have to ask you for some more help. So if you go to soccermorning.com, you'll see what we've done. We've set up a monthly goal. We're going to send you there. If you are so inclined to help support the show and keep us going, please consider contributing. We will gratefully accept whatever you want to offer. But if you have contributed in the past, or you have second thoughts at all, or look, you are of the opinion, you're one of those people, look, it's a free podcast, why should I have to give? Don't do it. I'm not, this is as low pressure as we can possibly make it. It really is. I don't want anybody to regret contributing to Soccer Morning. I really don't. So if you have second thoughts at all, if your finger hovers over the trigger button to hit yes, to send something, then don't do it. If you don't want to, you don't have to. This is, again, we're setting this up because this is the way for us to keep going. This is what we need to do to keep Soccer Morning on the air. And the other thing that's part of this is to pull back the curtain a little bit more. It's not just about, keeping us able to feed our families sort of thing. That's obviously part of it. This is my job, and I write a little bit, and that brings in some money, but this is my job. In order for it to be a job, it's got to be a thing that helps me keep going. Nobody's getting rich off of this. Let's just first say that. And second of all, there are costs related to running the show and keeping it on the air. And I know there's been some upset and some some angst over the fact that the live stream on Stitcher and TuneIn and iHeartRadio hasn't been working recently. That's part of this. In order to get that back up and running, there are some costs related to it, and this will help us do that. That's where this money is going, where part of this money is going to be going if you guys decide to help us out. So keep all of that in mind. We're treating this as very much a public radio kind of approach. So, that being said, soccermorning.com is where you need to go. You'll find it all there. We'll remind you on a semi-regular basis. I'll probably mention this day to day. And if we hit our goal for the month, then we're done. We don't have to talk about it anymore. And it won't be annoying. And we can get it out of the way. And I don't have to feel uncomfortable about this because that's where we are with it. That's the realities of Soccer Morning right now. And we will continue. If you have any questions about this, we're not going to just sit on our laurels and expect the listeners to help us out for everything. We're going to continue to try to develop other ways to fund this show. We have other things in the pipeline. We are working on other projects. And if that happens, then this will be done. We won't have to ask about this. We won't have to remind anybody to go to soccermorning.com. So there you go. There's your housekeeping moment. There's your quote unquote announcement. Again, you have any second thoughts at all? Not 100% committed to donating, then don't. That's fine. I won't hate you. I won't. And the other thing, just to allay any concerns over the Indiegogo campaign, this has nothing to do with the rewards that are coming out for the people who contributed to the Indiegogo campaign. We're still working through those. Obviously, Maxie and his music today. We're going to be lining up our guest host schedule. We've got tons and tons of contributors to go through there, individuals. So we're working on that. And again, thank you if you helped us out back in January. Internally grateful. And this funding, this public radio type of funding campaign will not change anything about how we, I don't even know how to say this exactly. I'm just fumbling around. But there you go. One more time, soccermorning.com. Other bit of housekeeping. Yesterday's music, I don't have the lineup yesterday. I do recall there was some Bob Marley on there, some Pearl Jam, and I identified it as music selected by Isaac from Pittsburgh. It was not selected by Isaac from Pittsburgh. We had a mix-up. Apologize to Isaac, he sent me an email where he's very distraught. I don't know if that's an insult to Dorman from Iowa, who did pick the music. And thanks, Dorman, very much. I don't know if it's an insult that Isaac wasn't happy with being tagged with that music, but there you go. You guys can fight that out on Twitter, maybe. All right. So the rundown again today. Pablo Maurer in just a couple minutes talking about the D.C. mayoral primary, because in D.C., generally speaking, if you win the Democratic primary, you're going to win the election. You're going to win the general election. Muriel Bowser, who initially came out against the land swap deal that would get D.C. United the land to build at Buzzard Point, she may have backed off a little bit. We'll get the current status of her assessment of that deal, what this might mean, from Pablo Maurer in a couple minutes. John Arnold from Phoenix to preview USA-Mexico. The feeling in the camp, what's going to happen with Julian Green, certainly on the Mexican side of things. What are they going to be looking to do? And Leander Schlackens from FoxSoccer.com will join us at a little bit after 11 o'clock to roll through those Champions League results and definitely to talk about Barcelona and this transfer ban. A 2-window transfer ban. I know people are saying the number of months. Forget that. For me, more important is the fact that this covers the summer window this year and the January window in 2015. Is it going to stick? I think that's the key question. And Barcelona's ban comes from them essentially ignoring the rules regarding bringing in youth players under the age of 18. Because those rules are set in place by FIFA. They require players to stay in their home countries until they're 18 unless their parents are moving to a country of their own volition. And let's not be naive about this. Barcelona is not the only club who's breaking this rule. They may be the most high-profile club to break this rule. And you wonder if this is just an attitude, an obstinate attitude on the part of Barcelona. We're Barcelona. We can get away with it. We can do whatever we want. Maybe that's what's infected this club. And it does take a little bit of the shine off of a club that had so many good feelings around it. And not just because of the way they played and the titles that they won and having the best player in the world in Lionel Messi, but because they were more than a club. Because they had this community feel. One of the biggest clubs in the world, and still have a community feel about them. They still foster that attitude of, we're not just a commercial enterprise. We're something more. And then they go and they take money from Qatari interests, and they put the Qatari thing on there. What is it? Is it Qatar Airways? What's the sponsor? Because that was a big deal, and we've sort of moved past it now. Barcelona has a shirt sponsor that's not a charity. Wow, that's a shift. Don't act like it's not. And this, which may have been going on for a very long time, we'll get some background on it. This ban relating to bringing in players who they shouldn't be allowed to sign by the rules is part of a. You wonder, is there an infection running through Barcelona? They haven't always been perfect. I don't mean to set them up that way. I really don't. I'm just saying that Barcelona, and particularly for new fans of Barcelona, for New World fans of Barcelona, there's part of the attractiveness wasn't just the way that they play. What they do on the field. Part of the attractiveness was that sense of community, the more than the club attitude. This is the same. It's interesting to me, the psychology of this, because it's part of the same reason, and not that Dortmund has reached Barcelona levels and the amount of fans that they've generated in America, but it's part of the attractiveness of Dortmund also, isn't it? That sense that, we're different. We're not Bayern Munich. We're good. We're a big club. We can go win things. We can win a Bundesliga title. We can compete for the Champions League. And yet we're not just a juggernaut spending money. And now Barcelona's ban, in a more practical sense, is going to impact them right when they have some major players leaving. And they're aging. And their back line, their center back situation is a disaster. Saw a headline today with the injury. Piqué injured yesterday in the Champions League match against Atletico Madrid. Saw a headline somewhere that said they only have 2 healthy center backs, one of them being Javier Mascherano. Then they have 1 healthy center back. That's where Barcelona is right now. And I'm not saying they're going to take a massive fall. They're still Barcelona. This isn't good news for them, clearly. And again, be cynical about how fast this goes into effect and whether or not it stays in effect, for the summer and the January transfer window. It may be delayed a couple of years, in which case Barcelona goes on a spending spree and signs everybody. And does this affect Ter Stegen's pre-contract deal? Lots of questions of Barcelona. We'll talk to Leander Schlackens about that. Next up, Pablo Maurer, MLSist on Twitter, beat writer for DC United at MLSsoccer.com. He'll join us. We'll talk about the mayoral situation in DC. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Oh,
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning. Thanks again to Maxie for the music. Thanks a lot, Maxie. Thanks, man. How can I say it as sarcastically as possible? Thanks, Maxie. Pablo Maurer, MLSist on Twitter, MLS Soccer beat writer for DC United, joins us now. DCist as well. Hi, Pablo. How are you, man?
I'm good. I got to give Maxie credit for that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and on USA Mexico game day. So it's
that's the kind of creative control you get when you donate to Soccer Morning, I guess. Right?
That's exactly right, and we're very thankful for Maxie's support. But he likes to be subversive in that way. Pablo's here to talk about the DC mayoral election, and on the face of it, Pablo, that is the most boring topic we've ever had on this show, except for the fact that it could have a major impact on DC United's effort to build a stadium at Buzzard Point. Now, just to lay out the background here, Vincent Gray, current mayor, has some questions, corruption questions, perhaps ran a shadow campaign during his last run for mayor, and has now been defeated by Muriel Bowser in the Democratic primary. And for anybody who doesn't understand DC politics, that's essentially the mayoral election, although there will be a general election later this year.
Yeah, I think, I do think this primary was a little different in that, David Catania is an independent, actually former Republican, who will now face Bowser in the general election. If Gray had won, he actually had an outside chance to win. I mean, I think he was polling 7 or 8 percentage points below Gray, but Bowser, in some of the early polling in the general election has, a 20, 25 percentage point lead on him. So, the general election here in D.C. is kind of a non-issue. To give you an idea, in 2012, Barack Obama collected 92% of the vote here. In the general election. So it's a Democratic stronghold.
Yeah, and look, politics aside, for soccer fans and for MLS fans and for DC United fans, this is about the stadium. Vincent Gray was the guy who was championing this deal. He was the guy who was standing in that parking lot under the awning, the tent, talking about this deal. He's the one that set Alan Liu out on the path to get the land swap done. Muriel Bowser previously came out against the land swap. Is it fair to say she's against the stadium, or do we need to be more specific than that?
Yeah, I certainly don't think she's. Clearly the team, who obviously didn't back a candidate, but their preference certainly would have been Gray. If only for continuity's sake. Bowser, a couple of months ago, came out firmly against the stadium deal in its current state. She said that she didn't have any interest in the land swap portion of the deal. More recently, she's sort of softened her tone, and I think the general assumption there is that obviously she, if Gray is going to be pro stadium, she did as much as she could during this entire election to disassociate herself from Gray, to kind of take the populist stance of, if he's in favor for it, I'm against it. She kind of became the anti-Gray. So I think you've already seen her in the past few weeks sort of soften her tone about it, start to say kind of nuanced things like, I just want to make sure the deal is right for the city. So she seems to be backtracking a little bit. I don't think that Bowser's election is the death knell for DC United Stadium, the stadium plan in any way whatsoever. To assume that is kind of as short-sighted as assuming that if Gray had won, the stadium deal would have been a slam dunk. This is DC. Anything can happen.
It's a matter of, not only is it a matter of her personal stance, and that initial rejection of the plan may have been politics, as you said, setting herself up as a foil to Gray as this primary approached. It's also about what the city council is going to do. And I guess that at this point, Pablo, and maybe, I can't remember last time I saw an update, maybe at this point it's just worth talking about how much progress has been made and whether or not it's so far behind schedule that, we don't even know where it stands to begin with. Regardless of who's the mayor.
Yeah, I don't think any of us really, and the media have heard a whole lot about the stadium deal in the past several months. I think for a while there, the faucets were kind of pretty leaky around here, and I had a couple of council members and even Al News office sort of openly discussing the deal with me, and certainly other media members here. But it is something we haven't heard of. We haven't heard any specific details emerge in a month or two. And I think that sort of relates to a larger point, which is that any debate or discussion about the stadium deal that goes on in D.C. right now is sort of this sort of thing, right? It's like the deal as it currently stands. I mean, we're essentially debating a piece of legislation that people know very little about.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main tenets, obviously, people know. The city will cover the $150 million or so in infrastructure costs. The sort of like horizontal work, and DC United is going to pay for the stadium itself. And then there have been smaller details that have emerged. For example, that I believe that United is seeking an exemption from paying property and sales taxes at the site in exchange for sort of a vague revenue sharing agreement with the city. They would share a certain percentage of their profits over a certain point, which is, again, it's hard to know what to make of that, right? Because over what point, and this, that, and the other thing. So it's all this really nuanced kind of stuff. It's hard to even really talk about,
Yeah, there's obviously a visceral reaction on the part of taxpayers when it comes to the idea of funding a private enterprise, giving money to a private enterprise to build something like a stadium. And we've seen that across the country. And clearly there are critics of almost any stadium deal that gets put together if it involves help from local government. And this deal is no different, although I think there are a couple of different ways you can sort of parse it out. And we've seen those polls, Pablo, where 60% of DC residents are against the stadium, but maybe that's partly because it wasn't explained exactly correct in the way that the money would be shared, or the cost would be shared. I guess how much does the public feeling about DC United Stadium and this deal, and in the involvement of the government and whatever way they pay for the infrastructure, be it via land swap or otherwise, how much role will that play in the ultimate decision of whether or not to go ahead with this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that's, again, relates to a point that, the stadium deal, now that Bowser is pretty much the shoo-in for mayor, isn't dead, but it can't probably be pushed through in its current state. I mean, she's somebody who, about a week ago, did an interview with Greater Washington here in D.C., where she specifically mentioned, I think, what a lot of DC residents feel, which is this is a billionaire owner. Why are we chipping in anything? And I think the general consensus, and I think it's also worth mentioning, DC United in particular is in kind of a unique spot, because obviously geographically DC is sort of, they have fans, they draw fans from Virginia and Maryland, the surrounding states, that a lot of these people aren't even DC voters, so a lot of the support from a stadium isn't coming from necessarily the voting sort of base, that would, obviously I think a council member probably puts more stock in what a resident in their ward tells them than what somebody who lives in Fairfax, County tells them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think obviously, I mean, that kind of thing. I mean, it's sort of like the people who are in favor of the stadium say, well, it's actually not a bad deal, and I don't entirely disagree. I mean, I think you look at United, one of United's previous stadium deals that fell through in Poplar Point, and you look at what Poplar Point is today, and it's exactly the same. I think the city probably missed a chance to develop that area, and the same thing likely would happen with Buzzard Point if this deal fell through.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, obviously, stadium debate in any city is gonna bring out on both sides sort of like. I guess my bigger point, Jason, is I personally sort of, I'm not going to say I agree with Bowser, but I don't think there's any harm in sort of being thorough and evaluating all the city's options. I think when stadium deals come up, you like you said, you get the sort of not in my backyard types who are like, we're never going to finance and we're never going to put any money into a sports team. And then on the other side, you get the sort of blindly supportive sports fans who just don't even seem to care, about the fact that the city is about to spend this insane amount of money on a stadium, So It is. It's definitely a very divisive issue. DC is no different than anywhere else in the country.
No, and DC in a lot of ways is different in that it's well, okay. I don't want to set DC up as exceptional as compared to say New York, where they're trying to get a stadium built as well. It's a lot of red tape. It's a lot of getting through this process. And as a DC resident yourself, Pablo lives in DC. I'll ask you a couple of questions, and you sort of laid it out. You're for a thorough review. So in terms of the plan as it existed, or as it exists, because we don't know that it's dead, you're not 100% on board, but you're also not of the opinion that's a bad deal necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I am in favor of the stadium agreement. That's just my personal opinion as a DC resident. Obviously, I will say that I am even more strongly in favor of being extremely thorough about because the land swap portion of the agreement is obviously the kind of hot button part of it, and for good reason. I mean, the land that the city is slated to exchange, and get Buzzard Point back for is actually 3 blocks from my house and is of extremely high value. I mean, I am not I'm not like an appraiser. I'm not a real estate expert, but I would imagine that the city could probably get more for that land than what it's getting back. If they just went the route of, say, auctioning it off.
Yeah.
I am also, though, bright enough to realize that just because they sell, it's not like a direct linear thing, right? It's not like they would sell that land and immediately put all that money into the stadium. Again, this is DC, anything can happen. But I mean, as the deal stands right now, I think it's good for the city. Anybody who takes a walk through Buzzard Point, if you'd even want to do that, can sort of see that it's an extremely underserved, I say underdeveloped. It's basically damn near undeveloped, area, and it's right next to Nats Ballpark. And I think, in 5 to 10 years, it could be an extremely vibrant sort of addition to the district. But that obviously is just my opinion. Yeah. I do sort of understand the people who are against this as well. DC has a myriad of issues, from their school system to any other number of things that money might or might not fix. But, certainly, where does a soccer stadium stand on this list of priorities?
In the accounting of this, and there are a couple of different areas you can sort of take a look at. In the accounting of this, at least in the terms of the stadium deal and the land swap, I mean, you have to wonder, okay, yes, the site that the Reeve Center that they would be trading for the land, perhaps worth more than the $150 million that is in the plan. Then there's the matter of, well, would Buzzard Point be developed without the city's help at all? And you can say, well, Eric Tohir's a billionaire. Why doesn't he just pay for it himself? But there's no reason for the people that currently own land on that footprint to sell to him unless he makes an exorbitant offer. And why would he do that as a business? So there's, I'm saying there's a lot of moving parts here that in order for the deal to get done, you almost have to have that local help. But then you get the sticky problem of the money and where it comes from and where it could go otherwise. I guess at this point, Pablo, what we're looking at is what's the end game? I don't want to be negative. I mean, I want to believe this is possible, but I've seen enough of DC politics. I've been here long enough to know that it's still a dicey situation. What does DC United do, and how long do Levian and Tohir hang on?
Right. I mean, I think in relation to that too, I think some people might be thinking, well, Gray still has 9 months left. Can't the deal just be pushed through in his current term? But it's kind of a double whammy, Bowser winning, because not only is she going to be a double whammy for, I guess, DC United in some ways, because not only is she obviously going to be our next mayor, but she's also presently, she's a city council member and she's the chair of the council's committee on economic development, so she can actually, if Gray were to try and push this through, she could essentially, veto, not veto, but, keep a bill from being brought up for consideration that has anything to do with like a long-term lease, that kind of stuff, so, the end game right now is they're going to have to work with Bowser and the team, in my conversations with them and their sort of public sense in general, they've always stressed they're working with the city, not with Vince Gray, not with Muriel Bowser. This is kind of like a team effort,
Sure.
So I think the end game right now is they're going to have to reshape the plan. And I think the team is probably amenable to doing so to a certain point, but, as for Levian and Tohir, I mean, you have to wonder. The fact that they had that press conference last year to sort of announce, that this was essentially a damn near done deal. You have to think that those parties involved are probably getting a little frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they didn't know exactly what they were getting into with DC city politics,
Well,
but certainly anybody watching the press conference knew. I sort of immediately assumed this would turn into something far more complicated than it was made out to be.
Yeah. I think a lot of people assume they really kind of blew their wad a little early on that front. But then again, you're trying to work positive vibes to push the project forward. Jason Levian should have an understanding of DC politics. There's no reason for him to be naive about any of this. So, and that was part of the reason to bring him in. So you wonder about him and his frustration level. Now, last thing I'll ask you here, Pablo. Let me give you a couple different scenarios, and you tell me which one is the best case for DC United if this deal doesn't get done, if the Buzzard Point Stadium, because this is the best case. Number one, they leave the district and they move to, I don't know, Baltimore's the first name that comes up, but some other city. Number two, the league takes over and either runs the team at a loss, and you wonder how long they would be able to do that or want to do that, or they put the team into hiatus, which I don't know if they would ever consider that, but it seems like a possibility, or the team moves out to one of the exurbs like Loudoun County.
Sure. I don't know. I was actually just talking about this with Seth would tell me last night. I sort of, I kind of suggested the idea that the league might consider kind of pulling at Chivas, right? Just sort of owning the team for a while and actively searching for an ownership group that would be willing to maybe pony up a little more money on the private side to get the deal done quickly. But you kind of have to ask yourself, who would actually do that? In DC, I think the general understanding is the team would probably run for, operate at a loss for a while before that investor or investors, whoever they may be, would see any kind of black, So I don't know that's like a viable plan. I'm sort of torn with this because you want to say, well, the league would realize that DC United is one of kind of their, at least at some point in time, was one of their flagship franchises or, sort of one of the originals, and they would be really hesitant to lose, that franchise. But at the same time, you kind of look at, I don't think the league has done very much in the past for DC United stadium efforts in comparison to, an NYCFC or, that sort of team, so it's a total crapshoot, right? I think the only thing that really works out for DC at this point is that they get this deal done. I think their fan base has been through this. This is the third time now, that there's been there was the Poplar Point deal, and there was a deal in Maryland, that fell through, and now this, and this one might be especially painful because obviously it's like we just said, it was announced as kind of a slam dunk, so I don't know. It's tough to make anything out of this at this point. I think the only good outcome for DC at this point is that they get the deal done,
Pablo Maurer, DCist writer, MLSsoccer.com writer for DC United. Follow him on Twitter, MLSist. It's hard to say, Pablo. I love your handle.
I know, yeah. Do you have a suggestion as to what I should change my Twitter handle?
Well, no, I do think it's great, and I think it ties in with your DCist gig, but it's just hard to say. And really, how often are people going to say it? That's the good thing.
Yeah, nobody has, you know how it is. You go to sort of cover a national team game or something like that, and people are like, "Oh, you're MLSist on Twitter," and nobody's ever said it without saying MLSist and then saying that it's hard to say. So, I guess maybe I should put some thought into that.
Well,
I don't know.
It's hard to say, but it's easy to read. And Pablo is an excellent follow on Twitter, so go do that. Appreciate the time, Pablo. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Jason.
All right, there you go. There, Pablo Maurer on the DC United stadium situation, the mayoral election in DC, how it may affect those efforts. Please definitely go read Stephen Goff's review of the situation at WashingtonPost.com if you're interested in getting that local perspective. I think here's the key paragraph as it relates to Muriel Bowser, again, who defeated Vincent Gray for the Democratic nomination, or for the Democratic spot on the ballot in the general election coming up in about 9 months. Where does Bowser stand? This is from Stephen Goff's post. Initially, she came out against the proposal. She said she would not support a plan that would turn over the city-owned Reeves Center at 14th Street and U Streets Northwest to develop in exchange for a large parcel in the stadium footprint. Her stance was fueled in large part by politics, opposing a major gray initiative ahead of the campaign. But in recent months, her tone has softened, and those involved in the stadium talks believe in the event she wins, which she did, they could work with her. One figure said Bowser is open-minded and reasonable. She wants the right deal. Now, look, part of this, and as soccer fans, we have to recognize it, part of this is sort of where soccer is on the city's list of concerns, on the hierarchy. Now, I've made jokes in the past, and we've had Charlie Boehm, who's also a D.C. resident, on this show, and talked about how quickly Washington, D.C. and their city government would, for lack of a better word, bend over for the Washington Redskins. Terrible phrasing. They would do whatever it takes to get the Redskins back in D.C. That's a joke. I don't know that every politician would simply accede to the wishes of Daniel Snyder, but there's certainly a feeling that D.C. is a Redskins town, and that if it came to it and the Redskins wanted to move back, they would do everything they could to make a deal happen, and there would be none of this. There wouldn't be this grousing that takes months and months and months. That if there was a land swap involved in that it would be done fairly quickly, because no politician wants to be the one who stood in the way of the Redskins moving back into the district. But DC United doesn't get that same respect. And DC just built $1 billion stadium for the Washington Nationals. So there are a lot of things here at play. And while DC United is a flagship franchise of MLS, and it would be a disaster for them to be relocated, moved outside of the city, in my opinion. Even Loudoun County, which I mentioned to Pablo, it's a good 35-minute drive from D.C. And yeah, a lot of the D.C. United fans come from Northern Virginia, but there's no public transit to Loudoun County. There's some buses, I suppose. I don't know how many. I think you're getting all the fans on the buses. It becomes a driving situation. And that it's not quite Frisco, and it's not quite Commerce City, but it's in that vein. If that team ends up moving out to somewhere like Loudoun, and even Loudoun County is a dicey proposition, because right now they're having that county is supposed to be the home of the Virginia Cavalry and NASL, and they're not getting their stadium deal, or they're not getting their stadium construction underway on time. So there's going to be a delay for the Virginia Cavalry. And Fairfax County, which is much closer in, or parts of it are much closer in, could be inside the Beltway. There's nowhere to build there. That county's not going to do anything for DC United. Arlington County is completely off the list, which is right next to DC across the river. We've already seen PG County say yes and then change their mind. Prince George's County, sorry. And there are a couple of other places that are possible but don't really seem like the right fit, and certainly change how that team relates to this city. It's going to be fascinating to watch. And again, troubling, because there is a conceivable future where DC United is no longer in Washington, D.C. Disaster. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, John Arnold will join us from Phoenix, thegoal.com editor. We'll talk about USA-Mexico ahead of the game tonight. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
It just gets better. Music just gets better. USA Mexico tonight from Arizona, and there right now, Mr. John Arnold from goal.com, Arnold, John on Twitter. He is the new North American football expert on the World Football Phone-In on the BBC. Fantastic stuff, John.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I thought you were going to let us get to the chorus there. I think I know that one.
Oh, do you? All right, you want me to bring it back?
We'll see. I'm not sure. This will be testing me a little bit. Max has got a deeper repertoire than me.
Does he? But you are knowledgeable in the area of Mexican popular Mexican
burritos, bandas. Yeah, I mean it's all good. But let's talk soccer.
Okay.
Let's not have me sing.
Okay, well, you were going to sing. Yeah, that doesn't sound fun.
No promises.
Okay, that is, by the way, De Paisano a Paisano. De Paisano a Paisano by Los Tigres del Norte.
Yes.
There you go. In case you had that in your back of your mind, couldn't pull it. John, DC, sorry, wow, just shift my brain here. USA Mexico, this is always a big game, and it's a friendly, it's a cash grab. It's going to be a very pro-Mexico crowd there in Arizona. What exactly can the Americans pull out of this game in your mind?
That's a good question. I think that, Jurgen has made it very clear that he's going to call in a big provisional roster. He's going to call in everyone he can, and he's going to try and pare it down and leave it to the last minute. And so I think with the message that he's sending there, and I think this is what he's really trying to tell these players who are kind of on the fringe of making the World Cup team, is there are still chances and there's still time. So I do think that if someone puts in a good performance tonight, that they have a very good chance of making the World Cup. I don't know that people will necessarily lose spots that they've already secured, but I think guys who maybe are on the outside looking in, or maybe on the inside on the risk of falling off, could solidify positions. I think that you look at guys like DeAndre Yedlin and Michael Parkhurst, the fullbacks. If either of them have a fantastic performance tonight, I think you're looking at, those are guys who are getting a good look whenever Jurgen calls in the provisional roster. So that's what I think you can learn. And to be honest, that defense is going to be tested tonight. I think you're going to see maybe more, what are Omar Gonzalez and Matt Beasley going to do as center backs? I think that's still kind of a question mark, so I think you'll see that get tested tonight. So I think that's something else that Jurgen can learn about his team.
Now, it's easy to sort of look at this game as an opportunity to look at new players or players on the bubble, guys who could make a case in camp if Klinsmann goes with a big number of players to pare it down at the last minute. But it's also about, you just mentioned it, it's about getting more time on the field for Omar Gonzalez and Matt Beasley working together, and then farther up the field, finally getting to see one of the few times it's happened under Klinsmann, Bradley, Donovan, and Dempsey all together.
That's right. Yeah, asking them all about that during the week, about how little time they've really played together with the national team, they all kind of seem bemused by it. You're like, oh, that is an interesting statistic, because I think they feel very close. The U.S. camaraderie is always very high. The team loves to see each other. They love when they're called into the national team. And you can kind of tell that they're all friends, off the pitch and everything. So I think they've been surprised, too, that they haven't played together. Obviously, those guys have been around a long time, and they're very key, very important. And now that Dempsey and Bradley have returned to MLS, they're able to play this midweek friendly on a non-FIFA date. And I think that's big. The U.S., there was a lot of good feeling, and your listeners and you, Jason, will know this more than anyone. There was great feelings after the Hex. The United States was rolling high. They qualified easily, but I think some of that morale has slipped a little bit, maybe not inside the team, but at least from the fan base after some of the friendly losses. So I think this is an opportunity for them to get that back, and this core, those three guys, are guys who are going to be really clutch if they're going to be able to do that.
The news this week has been that DeMarcus Beasley and Michael Orozco were not released by Puebla for whatever reasons, whether that was gamesmanship on the part of a Mexican team or not. I don't know if we want to get into that, but it certainly affects both of those players and what Klinsmann might do with this lineup. Has there been a lot of talk about the absences of Beasley and Orozco leading up to the game?
There hasn't been as much talk as you might expect, because I think it's a situation where you don't see it changing. Puebla's not going to change their mind and suddenly send Beasley and Orozco. They didn't show up yesterday or anything. So I think the general consensus is you only have three fullbacks in camp. You have Michael Parkhurst, DeAndre Yedlin, and Tony Beltran was added. I think the general consensus and what I probably would forecast happening is that Parkhurst will probably play at left back. DeAndre Yedlin will start at right back, and then we'll probably see one of those guys get swapped out at some point. So It hasn't been that much discussion, honestly, from my perspective, and I don't have any insider information. Unfortunately, it's tough to get anything from Puebla. But knowing that club, I don't think it was conspiracy. I think it's probably more just lack of understanding what was happening. So it hasn't been too much, but it does affect what he's going to do. I think that's what you see with the fullbacks. It's tough for Michael Orozco, who's a guy who's probably not going to make the play into Brazil and maybe could have made an impact against Mexico. Yeah. Certainly did it at the Azteca, in that friendly a couple years ago. So he doesn't get that opportunity. It's rough for him, I think. Beasley, of course, will be on the team pretty much no matter, barring injury or something like that. So that's kind of the situation, and Jurgen didn't really mention too much of it during the week.
I'm bearing the lead here, but I continue to come back to I continue to have issues that pop up before I get to Julian Green, and we will. But with the Puebla situation, I think it's easy for Klinsmann to kind of cry foul over this. He doesn't really have much ground to stand on, but he's got a bully pulpit, at least as in terms of this game leading up to this matchup. Did he make a mistake putting Beasley and Orozco on his roster, or did Puebla give him some assurances that they back? I mean, I guess as you said, you can't get anything out of Puebla, but what's the sense that Klinsmann's giving? They changed their mind, or he made a mistake?
Yeah, here's what I know. I know that the U.S. Federation told me they found out the players were not coming on Sunday afternoon, which is when pretty much everyone else was getting in. My impression is, and look, this isn't a FIFA date, so Puebla doesn't have to send their players.
Right. I
think what happened was, the U.S. put in their calls, said, here's who we're calling up. And I don't think that, someone somewhere at Puebla didn't realize that they were called up or didn't realize. The other thing that didn't help is the results didn't really go Puebla's way in the relegation battle.
Right.
Atlas, Atlante, they both won during the weekend. Puebla drew with Leon. So I think there was also a cognizance of, wow, we are really in it now. We really could get relegated. In Mexico, only one team gets relegated. It's a long process over 3 years. It's a convoluted system. So it would be a huge blow to this club if they get relegated. I think just saying, hey, having two starters gone is probably a bit of a shock to the system. What I'm guessing happened is the U.S. made the calls, Puebla, someone signed off on it, and then someone this weekend realized, wait, what are we doing? We don't have to do this. Let's not. I really don't think it's conspiracy. I think it's almost club incompetence, to be honest.
Understood. An intern answered the phone and said, "Sure, no problem.
we'll send him over."
Yeah, no problem.
And then someone in the real office.
All right.
Well, look, and I mean, players. Tijuana said we're not sending anybody. We're in CONCACAF Champions League. Cruz Azul, Toluca, they sent players to the Mexican team.
Right.
But Cruz Azul held back, their goalkeeper. It's a situation where teams were okay with this, and it's not the fact that Puebla isn't allowing these players that I think has upset Jurgen Klinsmann so much. It's the fact that they allowed them to be called in, and then at the last moment said, "No, we're not going to do that." It's the timing, not the actual decision.
Right. Certainly a difficult situation for Klinsmann, but in the end, again, this is a friendly. He should be experimenting on some level, and to that point, the headline for most U.S. national team fans is the fact that Julian Green could play in this game. This one-time switch came through in a lightning flash. I mean, first, John, was this sort of just quiet confidence on the part of U.S. Soccer that they were going to get done this fast? It didn't seem like it was possible.
It doesn't hurt to have Sunil Gulati in the high position that he's in on FIFA's executive committee. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it certainly seemed that they were not super confident that it was going to go through, and then suddenly it just went through without any incident. So I don't know if that's a friends in high places situation or if FIFA just didn't really have that much to do today.
So is he going to play? That's the $1 million question.
Well, I think he will. I mean, you got him all the way over here. His dad's flying out. I mean, I'm not saying like because a player's parents are in the stands that you're going to play the player, but yeah. I mean, he came all the way out here. I expect Jurgen's going to make a lot of changes tonight. It's a friendly, and there's a lot of guys who, guys that are at full fitness, guys are at MLS, level. They're playing regularly now, but I do think you're going to see a lot of changes because I think Jurgen wants to see different things. I would be surprised if he doesn't get in, but how much will he play? Will he start? I don't see him in the starting 11. Right. I think he'll come on late and make a cameo, and we'll see how it goes. Obviously, I mean that's the funny thing, and you might be getting to this, but when we ask other players, Bradley, Zusi, other even Donovan, what do you think of Julian Green? I mean they've seen him for 2 days in training, and even earlier certain players had only seen him for 1 day, and they know about as much as we do. They know he runs through some cones pretty quickly, can do some high knee exercises. He stretches well, and of course they've played with him a little bit now. But for the most part, he's an unknown for even the team. So I think it'll be interesting to watch how he integrates and how Klinsmann chooses to do that. Maybe he doesn't play, but I think just because he's here, he's going to get on the field.
Now, despite it's a friendly and it doesn't matter, blah, 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 it is Mexico. You do want to beat them. You want to build that confidence. And clearly, Klinsmann's got to stick as closely to his plan as he can just to build that continuity, which means, again, Beasler and Gonzalez in central defense. And yeah, he's got to make some changes and make some decisions at the fullback spots. But everything else is going to be fairly predictable, I imagine, except who's going to get that started striker? Because neither one of the guys that are candidates, meaning Eddie Johnson or Chris Wondolowski, can really replicate what Josie Altidore brings to this team.
No, they really can't, and it's an interesting situation, I think, because you have Chris Wondolowski, who has scored against teams. We've seen him score a lot, in the Gold Cup, the early rounds, and in the Korea friendly. That's the only times he scored, but he hasn't really had that many opportunities against other teams. Yes, in the latter stages of the Gold Cup, and he wasn't able to get on the board. And I think Eddie Johnson is a player who, we've seen him play on the wide midfield. We've seen him play up top, and we've seen him come in as a sub, which I think, is probably what his role is going to be at the World Cup. But Chris Wondolowski would do the same thing, right? He's not going to start at the World Cup, but he's a guy who you would sub in. He gets into the box. He scores poachers goals. He can score aerially. So I don't want to say it's an indication on, one of the guys going to make the team, one of them's not going to, and whoever starts, they got to do well, they're not going to make it. I think we'll probably see Eddie Johnson up top, but I do think Jurgen will probably be looking hard at what Chris Wondolowski does just because of his success in the past couple of matches and his success in the Korea friendly. I think those 2 goals were very big, and I think that Jurgen's definitely going to be cognizant of that. Like I said, I would personally tip Eddie Johnson if I had to, predict the starter, but you could see Wondolowski up there. And again, I think both will probably see time, especially with, as you mentioned, not a ton of options there.
Let me flip this over and talk about Mexico a little bit. Miguel Herrera has come in, infused this team with a lot of excitement, obviously got past New Zealand with a team heavy on his guys, playing his system. What are the expectations for Mexico coming into this game? What differences might we see, or is he going to, is he essentially going to put out a team that will look like it will look in Brazil, only with a couple of names swapped out?
With Miguel Herrera, there's some things that just stay the same. He's going to play 5-3-2 with wingbacks, and that's what he's going to do. He's got Maza Rodriguez in the lineup. He's got Rafa Marquez in the lineup. He announces his starting lineup, which is awesome because we can analyze it. Steve announces the starting 11 the day before, and that's kind of his tradition. And a lot of coaches in Central America do that as well. So anyway, we know that Rafa Marquez is going to start in defense. Maza Rodriguez is going to start in defense. Juan Carlos Valenzuela is going to start. Valenzuela is going to start in defense. So we know that that's the same. What's different is he's called in a couple of guys from Cruz Azul who haven't really been in the national team picture. Marco Fabian, who has been unbelievably good in the Liga MX campaign. He moved from Chivas to Cruz Azul and was kind of a disappointment at Chivas. He's a young player who has always been, one of those guys that Mexico looks at as this guy's the future, part of that gold medal winning team. And wasn't able to really get anything done, and now he's producing at the league level. I don't know that Miguel Herrera is as impressed with him as maybe I've been and other pundits have been in Liga MX, but he's giving him the start. So I think that's something that's interesting, something to watch for, and a guy who could make a late push to get on the Mexico roster. The other thing is Rogelio Chavez is going to start a right back, a right wing back, a Cruz Azul player. Hasn't really been in the system. So we'll see what he can do. It's going to be, they're going to attack the fullbacks. They're going to attack the center back. They're going to push to those guys. And I think that's going to be something to watch is how Chavez gets down the right side.
How much does that affect what, and we've seen Klinsmann sort of hedge a little bit. I mean, look, he's been starting 2 midfielders at fullback for a large portion of the last couple of years in Beasley and Evans. And it always seemed like Evans' mandate was mostly defend first. I mean, pass the ball smartly out of the back. Beasley's mandate was to overlap and get up the field and create those opportunities. How much does that, you're not going to have either one of those guys in the lineup, but how much does what Herrera does with his formation affect what the fullbacks will do for the United States?
I think, Jurgen would tell you, we're just going to play our game and worry about us. And I think with the personnel he has, that's probably pretty accurate. DeAndre Yedlin, his strength is getting forward. If he does get that start, I mean, I don't think there's any reason necessarily. He's going to have his hands full. You got Miguel Ayun over there, who sometimes puts crosses into absolutely nowhere, but sometimes puts them into exactly where they need to go. And he's pretty good going forward as well. So I don't think it changes too much of what Jurgen is going to try and do. And look, DeAndre Yedlin is a young player. We haven't seen too much from him. And Michael Parkhurst has been really impressive this MLS season and also been impressive the last couple of times he's worn a national team kit. So it could all go right for Jurgen. It really could work out. And who knows, maybe those players make a push to say, a guy like Parkhurst, say not only should be on the roster, but maybe you got to look at giving me a starting spot in some of these send-off friendlies and see exactly what I can do. Maybe make a push right back where Brad Evans hasn't always looked the strongest, although he's been fine. So anyway, that's getting ahead of ourselves, obviously. I don't think it changes that much of what Jurgen does tonight, how Herrera lines up. He knows how he plays. He's watched games on him, so I think it'll be pretty much what we're used to seeing, honestly.
Our last question. What American player has the most to gain tonight? The American player not named Julian Green, and we've already talked about Wondolowski and Johnson.
I think it's Michael Parkhurst. If Michael Parkhurst can prove that he is an option at left back, I think that lets Jurgen do a lot of different things. We already know that he's okay at right back. I think if you can show that you're a player who can provide fullback depth, that could be really crucial. I mean, Jeff Cameron, Brad Evans, DeMarcus Beasley, Fabian Johnson, if he plays him at fullback, and after that, the situation is murky. There's not really any other guy. So I think if Michael Parkhurst proves he's an option at left back and could be used at right or left back at the World Cup, I think he has a lot to gain. And I honestly, I think he's got the biggest opportunity. DeAndre Yedlin's probably in that category too. It's about the fullbacks again, Jason. We always do this, but to me, that's where the real intrigue is tonight.
I'm going to guess, I have no reason to think otherwise, that Landon Donovan's going to start on the left side of midfield and Graham Guzzusi on the right. I imagine Brad Evans is going to get into the game. I don't know what that means for Donovan's night, whether he'll go 90 or not. We usually expect him to. But does Brad Evans, where do you see Brad Evans in this picture? I mean, Brad Davis. I got my Brads mixed up.
I was
John,
like,
I apologize.
No,
I meant,
sorry, Jason.
And you know what? Share a name. So I have no excuses. Brad Davis.
Your brother. Look, I think he's a guy who I was thinking was going to make the last roster spot just because he's great at set pieces and he's left-footed. But when the Julian Green switch was announced, I think that definitely, I think you don't put Julian Green out on this team if he's not going to be at least a candidate to go to the World Cup. So I think, Davis probably comes in late. It's going to be the same Brad Davis cameo that we've seen, I think. Yes, I think he's probably going to replace Donovan on the left, 60th, 70th minute maybe, maybe even later. Put in some great balls, put in some set pieces, beat Brad Davis. But will it be enough to make the World Cup? I don't know. He's probably going to be one of those guys that gets included on the provisional, but it's tough to see him. There's just a lot of competition at that spot right now.
That's John Arnold. He's in Phoenix for USA Mexico this evening, Goal.com editor. Find him. Go check out the BBC World Football Phone-In podcast from this past week, and John did an excellent job in with Tim Vickery and those guys, and listen to him get his choice of terminology made fun of. Terrible stuff, John. Terrible. Come on.
It's good to be on a show where I can say as many Americanisms as I want. Thanks,
there
Jason.
you go. Appreciate that, John. Thanks a lot, man. There he goes, John Arnold, live in Arizona for USA Mexico tonight. I don't know what to make. And by the way, I'm wearing, this is an AO scarf that I was sent by AO Portland, American Outlaws Portland, that says, "Death becomes you" on one side. We are going to Brazil on the other. It's a World Cup group of death scarf by those guys. They sent along. Thanks very much for that. I'm wearing it almost specifically, almost entirely to balance out our musical choices today, and the fact that our friend Maxi Rodriguez is obviously rooting for Mexico this evening. So there you go. That's right. John Arnold, also part of MLS in 30 on NASN. So check that out as well. I don't know what to make of this game. I don't know what to expect. I don't know how upset I'll be by a U.S. loss. And I'd be curious to know what American fans are expecting tonight, what they hope to see. Are you really going to be focused on individual player performances like Julian Green, like Brad Davis, like Eddie Johnson, like Michael Parkhurst? Or is it about the team's performance overall? Is it about beating Mexico because it's Mexico? Got to beat Mexico every time out. The rivalry is that intense. Is it right now, a couple of months ahead of the World Cup for both teams? Is it that intense? I'm not so sure. A couple of items I wanted to get to before we grab Leander Sherlackens from Fox Soccer in a couple minutes to talk Champions League and Barcelona's transfer ban. Number one, FIFPro, the International Players Union, or Players Advocacy Group. I don't know, do they count as a union? Do they collectively bargain? I don't know that they do. The Players Advocacy Group, FIFPro, has released a report on mental health issues within professional footballers. The headline reads, study finds mental health issues affect 26% of active players. They polled, measured, talked to 300 active and former professional players from the Netherlands, Scotland, Republic of Ireland, USA, Australia, and New Zealand. And it says that players, 1 in 4 players has depression, anxiety, mental health issues. This is something, I'm not stunned by this. I'm not overly surprised by this. And look, a lot of the guys that are playing in Ireland, USA, Australia, New Zealand, some of them in Scotland, aren't making a ton of money. So I don't know that this is going to follow, but I do think it's easy for fans, especially when we talk about the biggest clubs, the biggest players, the ones who make the most money, for us to sort of stand back and say money cures all their ills. They get to play a game for a living. How could they possibly be depressed? How could they possibly have anxiety? How could they possibly have a bad, have an internal life where they are dealing with mental health issues? Obviously, money doesn't solve everything. Just because you don't have to worry about paying your bills, some of these guys do because they spend too much. But just because you don't have to worry about paying your bills month to month doesn't mean you don't have anxiety and depression and responses to your particular situation. It's all relative. Rich people can be depressed too. And not all of these players are rich. Clearly, the anxiety of having to perform day in and day out can be debilitating for a lot of people. 1 in 4, does that sound about right to you? I think it's higher. That's obviously higher than the general population. I don't know what that number is. But 39% of former players have mental health issues. After you retire, your life is playing a game, playing soccer, no matter how much money you make. And then you retire, and what do you do with your life? Where do you go? And I think it's interesting. And again, they talk to guys in the USA. And I think it would be interesting to compare the post-playing life of so many of these MLS players. Now, this is going to change over time, and it's not across the board. It's not an across-the-board truth. But I just read as an example, I just read an interview with Will Hesmer, former goalkeeper for the Columbus Crew, last with the LA Galaxy, retired as a Galaxy player, host of injuries that ended his career, was a very good goalkeeper in MLS. He talked about how he didn't really have MLS as a goal until he got to college, and he was already sort of, he was already getting some attention from pro teams before he really thought about professional soccer as a career. Then he went to Wake Forest, and he had a degree to fall back on. And when he retired, he's now in wealth management and living in North Carolina, working in wealth management. And we've heard stories about MLS players who retire and go into the business sector, or in some cases, run foundations, or just go into the private sector in general, especially the Americans. Those guys are set up a lot of times. And this is part of the process of college being a major factor in American soccer players and producing American soccer players. If we move away from college and there's less reason for kids to go to college, especially the American guys, when they end their careers, what do? Where do they go? Not everybody can be a broadcaster. Not everybody can step directly into television or punditry and have that be their career. There's only a handful of those jobs out there. So what do? I imagine that contributes to that 39% number. The other thing I wanted to touch on here, and again, Leander Schlackens in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to point you in the direction of geostadia.com, the website of Chris Gaffney. We've had him on the show several times. He's based down in Rio. He's been chronicling the process of getting Brazil ready for the World Cup. And he's got a humdinger, for lack of a better word, piece that posted yesterday at his website. And just to give you a taste of this, the lead The violence that permeates daily life in Brazil is becoming more visible as if the stresses of preparing for the World Cup are making people, infrastructure, and institutions crack. In the past few weeks, we've had a series of horrors that I refuse to ignore. A woman was shot in the chest while getting bread for her 4 children. The police that shot her, who between them were responsible for scores of deaths, threw her into the back of their SUV as they drove away, the door opened and she was dragged hundreds of meters down the street in front of her friends and neighbors. And then another daily act of horror, a BRT feeder bus came too fast around a corner, lost control, and jumped the divider, killed 3 children and a woman who were waiting to cross. Lack of urban planning and general insanity of the bus system are responsible for this daily violence that people have to face in Rio. These people have died because there's no over or underpasses. There have been no intervention by public authorities to reduce the public risk on what locals called the corner of death. When the Brazilian media reports on these accidents, they are mostly interested in how long it takes for the traffic to start flowing again. The only reason I bring this up, number one, I think it's good to be informed. We talked to Chris about the protest, likely impact on the World Cup. We talked about all of these issues. I think it's good to be informed. But the other reason is, if we can learn something about what's going on in Brazil ahead of the World Cup, why not? And then you look at this situation, and we're going to get, I just feel like we need to continue to look under the top layer. Because when the World Cup comes, and I will be as guilty of this as anybody, we're just going to pay attention to the pretty pictures and the soccer happening and the full stadiums and the people singing and the fans from around the world celebrating. That's what we're going to focus on. And all of this stuff will kind of get swept under the rug. I'm not sure there's any pressure we can provide. I'm not sure there's any way we can lean on Brazil. This obviously is not going to be a perfect situation for the World Cup. And I think it's interesting to take a look through the eyes of Chris Gaffney. So geostadia.com. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Leander Shalakins from Fox Soccer will join us. We'll talk Champions League results, preview, Barcelona's transfer ban, Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Me espero, no voy a
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning. Man, just want to let that play. Just want to let that play. Joined now on the telephone by somebody else who's in Phoenix for the USA-Mexico game, but is going to talk to us about some European topics. Leander Schlakens from Fox Soccer. Leander, how are you, sir?
I'm well, Jason. How are you?
I'm well as well. I sort of processing the fact that Phoenix and Arizona does not follow daylight savings time. On the East Coast, I'm going to have to stay up at 1 a.m. to watch this game, and I'm not sure it's going to be worth it. But
I was confused about it as well until I actually got here and turned on my phone and realized that I was 3 hours behind the East Coast.
Yeah, it's they're on Pacific time for some reason because they don't like daylight savings time in Arizona. But we are here to we've got you here to talk a little bit about some European topics. I'm going to start. I think the headline this morning has been Barcelona's transfer ban, but we've got to do Champions League. We've got to talk about yesterday's results and a little bit about today's first legs. Yesterday, did either one of these results surprise you? The way that Manchester United went about their business against Bayern was no surprise, but ultimately to get a 1-1 draw when everybody kind of thought Bayern would score a couple of goals, was that a shock?
Well, I thought that result was surprising. I didn't think Manchester United would simply be able to keep Bayern out of its box sufficiently to drag out a draw. I thought they were going to get overrun, and certainly at times it seemed like they were just kind of playing keep away from Manchester United. But they were pretty well organized, as United generally have been in Europe this year. That's sort of the funny thing. I mean, they almost seem a bit bipolar this year, where they're just a different team in Europe than they are in England. And even though in the first leg against Olympiacos in the last round they weren't that because they lost 2-0, and it seemed like they might be out, they then recovered in the return leg and won 3-0, of course, on the Robin van Persie hat-trick. But I was surprised that they were able to just keep them at bay long enough to get the result. And frankly, if Danny Welbeck is a little bit more careful with his chances and a little bit more assertive up front, maybe they even win that game, and that really would have been a shock.
Yeah, I think you could make the argument that they, based on those chances, I'm not going to say deserved, because we are loath to give a team that plays reactive soccer the benefit of the doubt on a deserved result, Leander, and that was the fascinating part for me, is sort of the combination of it's at Old Trafford. It's Manchester United with everything that they've brought to the table, everything that they've accomplished over the years, playing that style. I mean, playing those tactics, and in front of that crowd. And yeah, it's been a rough year, but I got to imagine it's kind of odd for a United fan to be in that building and watch their team just cede possession like that.
Yeah, no, it is funny for them to have to go around telling people now, we are a big club, we are a big club. And I'm going to sound like a nerd here, but it always reminds me of that line in Game of Thrones where someone tells the 18-year-old king, any man who has to say, I am king is no true king. Right. And that's the sense I get with Manchester United. Obviously, they're a big club, but it's funny that they sort of have to go reminding people. And ultimately, it is very telling that them getting a 1-1 draw against Bayern Munich at home is considered this massive victory for them somehow.
Bastian Schweinsteiger scores and then gets a red card and will miss the second leg. And yeah, this is United giving themselves a chance. I don't know that anybody really will pick them to do the same sort of job at the Allianz, but at least they go to Germany with some hope.
They do. I mean, Schweinsteiger is out. Thiago is out. Javi Martinez is suspended as well. So they might run up against a little bit of a personnel crisis in midfield. Martinez has been playing in defense, of course, but he would be an obvious solution slot into midfield. So in that sense, there does seem to be a chance there for Bayern, but the chance would be an awful lot better for United. But the chance would be a lot better if they had the Van Persie back. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're still dealing with their own absences. This was very much a counterpunch type of game, and you can't imagine them getting that job done against Bayern. This would be if United did get through. Where would it rank on Champions League upsets at this point in the tournament, Leander?
Well, you're reminded, of course, immediately of the 1998-99 final, I believe it was, when they overturned the 1-0 deficit to Bayern in the final. in the last few minutes, and I think it would be a shock of that magnitude, roughly, because I mean, Bayern is the new Barcelona in a sense. They are sort of just destroying everybody in Europe, which isn't to say that Barcelona isn't Barcelona anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But Bayern is right now the hot team and the best team and the deepest team in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be, it would be a big shock. I mean, it would, it's funny to say, but Manchester United would be the Cinderella story of this year's Champions League.
Amazing how our expectations have been adjusted by this season. Speaking of Barcelona, 1-1 draw with Atletico Madrid. That's got to be a slightly disappointing result for Barcelona. Although with the score tied and yeah, they gave up an away goal. They would still be favorites away in the second leg. Do you think?
I think so. I mean, it wasn't entirely unexpected. I mean, these teams have played each other a few times now this year, and those are very, very low-scoring games because in the image of their coach Diego Simeone, Atletico Madrid is a really good and well-organized defensive team, and they're just very savvy in a way that even Real Madrid in sort of the last few years against Barcelona hasn't been at just clogging up traffic and just making it hard for Barca to develop real chances. I mean, aside from, maybe 2 or 3 of those really good through balls by Messi or Iniesta, Barca, by and large, had to settle for long shots.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect that the second leg will also be a bit of a slog, and that will, again, consist mostly of Atletico just trying to negate Barcelona rather than to attack them. Barca will be without Gerard Piqué, which is huge because, in my view, he's their one semi-capable defender who they now lose. So that's a big blow. I think Barca sees it through, but it's going to be close, and it's going to be another perhaps a bit dreary and slow game.
And Diego Costa injured for Atletico Madrid, which is a big blow for them. I'm not sure what his prognosis is. And you mentioned the capable defender, Piqué being Barcelona's one capable defender. I saw somewhere, maybe it was on Reddit or something. Somebody said something like, Barcelona only has 2 healthy central defenders, and one of them is Javier Mascherano. And then I said, well, they only have 1 healthy central defender, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Piqué, I should add, I said semi-capable.
Well,
but,
okay, there you go.
They're in trouble. I mean, Marc Bartra isn't a terrible defender, but he's inexperienced, and I don't know that he's a Champions League defender. And now, of course, Barcelona are facing a situation where it's possible that in the short term, they won't be able to add any depth with this transfer ban.
Yeah, that's the next thing I'll get to. Barcelona's transfer ban comes down from UEFA. It's related to bringing in under 18-year-old players to their youth system. Now, the details of what their transgressions actually are, I haven't gotten to that yet, Leander. I don't know if you can shed any light, but I imagine it's just a matter of going around the rules that say you can't sign foreign talent before the age of 18 unless certain conditions are met.
Yeah, that's what it seems to come down to. I was looking at it. I couldn't really figure it out either what exactly they did. But, I mean, it's no secret that they brought down Lionel Messi when he was 13, and that might have been before that 18-year-old rule came in. But they also have that American kid, I forget his name, who is a lot younger, and this is just a policy that they have. And I think the way they get around it is to basically have the whole family resettle and to help them with that. But, I mean, you have to admit that looks a little bit shady. I mean, that is a way of getting around those rules and to sort of bend them in your favor, to resettle a family and presumably to help them do that in some way is a form of professionalism. And so it is a transfer for a minor. So it's not entirely surprising, although the penalty here is very hefty indeed, because if Barcelona really can't make any transfers for the next 2 transfer windows, and if that applies to transfers that have already been arranged, they are in big, big trouble. Because, Victor Valdez is supposed to be leaving after the season. They apparently have already lined up Marc-Andre ter Stegen, a German goalkeeper. If that falls through, then then it looks like Pedro Pinto is their goalkeeper next year.
Are you there, Leander? I seem to have lost Leander Sherlakin's connection. I'm not sure why. We've been undermined by Skype once again. We'll see if Leander comes back. In the meantime, let's look. I mean, we were talking about Barcelona and the transfer ban. This is obviously pretty debilitating. And again, I'm cynical about this only because I assume Because why wouldn't you assume that Barcelona is going to file some sort of appeal? That they will go through whatever process. They'll go to the CAS or wherever they can to keep this ban from being put into place anytime soon. Now, they may not succeed in getting it completely removed. They may not succeed in getting it overturned, but they may be able to push it back. Give them some time to replenish their roster ahead of next season. Because, again, Ter Stegen is already pre-contracted. Is that impacted? Don't know. They need a goalkeeper. They clearly need central defenders. They clearly need some help. They've got an aging squad in some very key spots. So how exactly can they go about pushing this transfer ban back as far as possible? And that's really what their goal is going to be. And do you honestly believe they won't be successful? And when it comes to the transgressions of Barcelona on this front, and again, the best assumption is that they are avoiding the spirit of the rule. And I guess in a technical sense, you could argue that that's breaking the rule. Because as far as I understand it, in order to have a player younger than 18 join your team, join your academy, come in, that player's family or parents have to be moving to that country of their own volition for an opportunity outside of anything connected to the club. That's my understanding. That's clearly not what happened with, the American player that Leander mentioned. I'm not saying I think that kid should be leaving Barcelona or his parents did anything wrong. But if you go and look at the story, I think it's pretty clear. It's blatant. It's out there. It says they moved because of this opportunity, and Barcelona set them up. Maybe it's not that clear. Well, I don't want to speak out of turn. Maybe it's not that clear. But that seems to be the case. That Barcelona is setting up people up so that the kids can join the academy. And it's a good point that was made. I saw made on Twitter earlier from Keith Hickey. Said, why do they need to cheat? Because if they're being punished, they must have cheated. Why does the best academy on the planet need to cheat to get in these talented kids from abroad? Follow the rules. If your academy's that good, follow the rules, you'll produce the talent. It's because everybody's looking for an advantage. And again, let's not be naive about this. Barcelona's not the only club that's done it. They're not the only club that's going. This might not even stop them. This is very much like, I'm going to analogize it to anything that happens with the NCAA. Anytime the NCAA comes down on a program because they violated recruiting rules, or some player was given money by a booster, or whatever the transgression is, anytime they do that, we sort of have to realize this happens everywhere. That school just got caught. In this case, apparently Barcelona got caught, and they still have to deal with the fallout from Neymar's transfer. Whatever happens then, both in the world of football and within the Spanish legal system. It's interesting times at Barcelona. We didn't get a chance to talk about today's Champions League matchups with Leander. PSG, Chelsea, Madrid, and Dortmund. I would expect both home teams to take leads into the second leg. It's just a matter of how big those leads will be. I think Dortmund getting out of Madrid with a draw would be a fantastic result for them. They can get an away goal. Maybe they could stomach losing 2-1 if they can get an away goal. Chelsea, on the other hand, I think Chelsea completely locks it down. Jose's not going to mess around. And I think the goal for Chelsea will be a scoreless draw in Paris. That sets them up nicely when they go back to Stamford Bridge, where, generally speaking, they don't lose. They don't lose. Jose can find some more European glory. All right. Closing out this edition of Soccer Morning on a Wednesday, USA-Mexico tonight. Should be fun. Follow me on Twitter, DavisJSN, as I'm very tiredly watching that game and commenting on it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll definitely get into a review tomorrow, if I can wake up in time for the show. Also, to remind you, we announced this at the beginning of the program. I'll do it here again. SoccerMorning.com. It's where you can go to help support the show. We are setting a monthly goal. This is the reality of what we're doing here. We're going to be pushing for some other areas of development, for lack of a better term. But for the time being, what needs to happen in order for us to continue is to get a little bit of support. So anybody that wants to check that out, soccermorning.com will redirect you nicely. And again, don't feel any pressure. If you have any question at all whether or not you should, don't. I don't want to be the guy who. We don't want to be the show that made you spend money that you can't spend or that you didn't really want to spend. So we appreciate everybody's help there. iTunes ratings and reviews. The other thing about the funding is once we get that going, we can get the live stream back up. And I know people are interested in the live stream, getting that back on Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, NASN.TV/live, all of those places. In the meantime, YouTube is the place to go. Podcasts, place to go. iTunes, ratings and reviews, those help us out. The more we get up there, the more likely it is we can develop some things, and the less likely it is I have to say, go to soccermorning.com very often. And thank you very much to Maxi Rodriguez for his musical contribution today. Again, it's not really what I would usually pick, but he generously donated to the show, and it's his right. And head of USA Mexico, really, how can you go wrong with this, right? This one, Tu Carcel? I don't know. All right, let me just go ahead and fade that one out because that's not how I'm going to close the show. Thanks a lot for listening to Soccer Morning on the North American Soccer Network at NASN.TV. We'll be back tomorrow. USA Mexico review, Champions League review. Join us then. Bye.
On the boulevard, I lended. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was odd.